Hello everyone. As you might know, last couple of weeks were quite turbulent for our United States financial system. Because why? Because of course 3 banks failed, which was Silvergate Bank, Signature Bank, and of course Silicon Valley Bank. Now here I will start and lay a bit background of this industry, and then we will go very shortly to each of these banks because we have limited time and I can't make this in length for hours, although I could. Maybe this will be for a different video, but still, let's start with basics. The thing is that in the middle of March, out of nowhere, 3 major banks failed, and then liquidity risks were facing to other small banks, and all financial system was in some sort of panic mode. But what really happened? Now here's the thing. There were banks who were exposing themselves to startups and crypto industry, and banks which failed, Silvergate Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature Bank, were all part of this game, and they had issues and they had problems, and many people who were tied to these banks were well aware of that. So what did they do? They start to balance their bets and hedge their risks, and this is a fancy way of saying that they were simply trying to get out their assets into banks that might fail. And once people started to witness that, they started to do it themselves. So a couple of small bank runs started, and from one side this is nothing spectacular because banks have to be aware of the fact and they have to have reserves, and in fact all of these banks had significant reserves for that. But what was the thing? They held their money into treasuries, and due to the interest rate rise, treasury value plummeted, which is nothing bad because treasuries will repay their debt and people will get all of their money because they will be repaid at face value. But if you are putting them into balance sheets by their market value, that means that if someone has to sell them, they have to sell them into loss. And this is what happened to these banks. Basically they had to give deposits back, but those deposits were held into treasuries. Treasuries plummeted into value, so they were able to pay only a fraction of that. People started to sense that there is problems. Bank run intensified, and this gave self-fulfilling prophecy because fears of the bank run effectively started real bank run, and banks were in trouble. This is like mild word for it. They were wiped out. So this is what happened. Each of these banks has slightly different story, but this background is similar because they were having same business model as I told you previously. They were either extremely dependent on cryptocurrencies or technologies which were battered in last months, and they held their monies into treasuries, and this made twofold risk which materialized, and consequences we see as it are now. So let's start very shortly with each of these banks. First is Silvergate Bank, and in fact here's the interesting thing. Silvergate Bank didn't collapse, it voluntarily liquidated itself. This is different because that means that it has their own legal protection and they control their own assets still, so it has in a much better position than it were if they were to closed by Federal Reserve. So, and what's the drill here? Of course it was very tied to FTX, of which we know everyone, and I talked about it also in my videos, and it was probably, as they say themselves, it was the tipping point of them, because once the FTX collapsed, this bank has had very deep problems, and effectively they didn't actually made their world after that. Once FTX collapsed, their business model was into question, and if we see how it manifested into stock charts, we would see that since autumn when FTX collapsed, its stock followed that pattern and collapsed it steadily and was in the mid-teens from $60 to $20 in just a couple of months, when people actually see that this bank was in serious trouble due to the FTX, because it was exposed to FTX. And when some other problems of its liquidity emerged, it plummeted to $2, and probably its CEOs made the smartest move and self-liquidated itself. So that's kind of story. What was the tipping point of this bank's close? I couldn't say everything about this bank every time in more detail, but that was the main issue here. So let's go to Signature Bank. Signature Bank is a bit larger bank, and it were closed by Federal Reserve. So, and actually it was not in Silicon Valley, but still like it matters, no? But Signature Bank was more tied to cryptocurrencies and was, yes, I'm having almost misread Signature and Silvergate Bank because they spelled similar, excuse me, but yes, it was relatively tied to cryptocurrencies as other banks, and of course it witnessed similar fate as other banks. Of course its fortune were not tied to FTX as it was with Signature Bank, but nevertheless you would see that people who work there, their fortunes changed in 1 year rather dramatically, because this is like January 2022. It has stock price of 370 and now it's out of business just 1 year later. But here is the most interesting thing. Only a couple of months ago its stock were at $130, and then it doesn't, because people sensed fear, and that's only you have to know, because exposure to crypto industry and vintages only mean that much. But once people start to say that there is problems ahead, bad things happen. Because let's see, 9th of March 2012 stock price, and then there is no stock price. Unfortunate, not to say more. And of course, here's the biggest of them all, Silicon Valley Bank, because this story is quite wide, and so I will rephrase what we all know, that this was one of the premier banks which engaged into financing of startups, and many startups and vintage companies were in some part related to Silicon Valley Bank. So it was in the heart of Silicon Valley, of course, judged by its name. And once those companies which were having good days in 2021, 2022 started to go under, bank was in problems. And as I told you about all of these videos, once this bank got into problems, they had to meet their deposit claims, but they were not able to do that. So everyone was involved in these problems in here, and you could see that into its stock price also. It was like 700 into late 2021, more than 700, and then it was 300 just after a year, and then suddenly it was zero. People were claiming that bank was fine, everything was fine, but I'm not sure about it. What happened beneath there, what happened behind there, we don't know, because that's why I cannot tell you like very exposed stories to specific things of these bank collapses. Only the fact that they collapsed quite quickly, and that's it. What will happen after that, we will see. I probably will make another video in 1 week or 2 weeks, because these are ongoing events. Now we could basically define facts that 3 major banks have been closing, and in fact 2 of these banks were one of the largest banks in United States history which failed. So this is worth noting event. And how would markets react? How would Federal Reserve act? Well, we have to wait and see for that, because as I'm saying, these are ongoing events, and let's see in next videos what are future implications for that. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.